Data from KDOT shows a decrease in the number of traffic fatalities in the state, including last year when Kansas saw the lowest amount of traffic-related deaths in decades. Dylan Domingue joins us with a look at those numbers. Dylan?
Yeah, Rachel, one traffic fatality is still one too many, but the stats are trending in the right direction. During a House committee hearing on transportation, KDOT reported seeing a peak in 2020 with 426 traffic-related deaths. However, in each year that has followed, that number has continued to trend down. This includes last year when KDOT reported 347 fatalities, which is actually the lowest number of highway deaths since records started being kept back in 1947. Now, while last year's numbers could still change as information is coming in from trauma centers across the state, KDOT says the decrease in fatalities is the result of driver education and more legislation being introduced to increase roadway safety.
We want to make sure that we're designing our roads and we're doing what we can to help prevent serious injury and fatal crashes. Another issue is how quickly can we get those folks to a trauma center? Like that is one of the biggest predictors for the outcomes of a crash.
And KDOT did say that they have more work to do this year to ensure that traffic fatalities decrease for the 5th consecutive year. So far this month, they have seen 3 times more highway deaths compared to January of last year.